What will the internet say if we ask, what is D&D about?
Dungeons & Dragons is a game about sitting down with friends to play through a story together.
So at its core, D&D is a collaborative storytelling game.
Dungeons & Dragons only continues to grow and continues to be its own genre, really, of storytelling.
D&D is a storytelling adventure game.
The consensus seems to be storytelling, but how good are those stories? Let's talk about it. Hello, welcome to Dungeon Story Time, a space where we can learn together how to tell better stories with Dungeons & Dragons. My name is Gerardo, and I really care about stories. So naturally, I wanted to play D&D. For the past few years, I've been obsessed, trying to consume as much D&D media as I can to find great stories. Sadly, I have not found anything that keeps my attention for long. I did enjoy some of the D&D live streams, but most of the time it felt like I was captured by things that were independent of D&D. For example, I really enjoy humorous adventures. I enjoyed absurd situations and how really good players could create something new out of thin air. But it then felt like I was constantly looking for an impromptu episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway to show up in the middle of these D&D games because the story itself was not engaging enough. So I started wondering, is D&D really about storytelling? The internet tells us that it's about storytelling. The creators of the game constantly tell us that it is about storytelling. I mean, the first sentence in the rulebook that we get with the starter kit says that Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game about storytelling. So what is happening? Is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with the game? That is the question that I would like to explore today. When I think about questions like this, I like to start by defining the terms. For our analysis, we want to have definitions for story and for Dungeons & Dragons. A story is a description of things that happen or are experienced by real or imaginary people for the purpose of entertainment. Since the definition of Dungeons & Dragons in the rulebook is not that useful, let's look at the minimal components and let's use that as our definition. To play a game of D&D, a group of players create characters. Then those characters are presented with situations by the Dungeon Master or DM, and the players deal with those situations through their characters by rolling dice. So far, it does not feel that controversial to call D&D a game of storytelling. Even with such a minimal definition, we already have many of the components of our definition of story in there. We have imaginary people experiencing things, and things are happening to them. Also, as this is a game, it is 100% for the purpose of entertainment. So is that it? Case closed? Not quite yet. It is easy to miss, but in the definition, it says that these events and experiences must be of importance. Things are constantly happening to us. We are constantly experiencing things. Yet, that does not mean that anyone wants to hear about it. Most of the things that happen to us are not important enough for us to tell anyone about them. What about things that happen within a game of D&D? Are they important enough? What makes something important enough to be story-worthy? This question reminds me of a dramatic principle known as Chekhov's gun. The principle states that in a piece of writing, if you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off. If it is not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. The main point here is that all of the elements in a story should feel relevant. When many threads are created that go nowhere, or many promises are made that are never fulfilled, those books, those stories, those creators, those authors, they will eventually lose us. Another aspect of importance in stories are character arcs. A character arc is a transformation or inner journey of a character throughout a story. Personally, I find stories in which the characters are challenged, change, and then manage to change the story to be the most interesting. But this concept is not just my personal preference. If you look at storytelling frameworks like The Hero's Journey or Harman's Story Circle, you will notice that their formula to create good stories focuses on character arc more than any other story component. Let's take a brief detour and look at Harman's study circle to see what I mean. What is interesting about frameworks like this is that they so concisely capture both kinds of importance. Every part of the circle creates change and movement in the story. In the first transition from you to need, an event must happen that triggers that transition. The character must be made uncomfortable for it to move into action. Every single transition is like that, but none of these events happen without reason. Each and every one of them is relevant to the creation of the character arc. The character needs or wants something, but it is not easy. They must try new things. In that journey, they will experience loss and triumph, and eventually they will come back. They will come back transformed. And because of the change within them, what used to be familiar might now look a little bit different through their new eyes. To summarize, our theory is that a good story makes every event relevant to cause a character to change. At this point, we could dig deeper into each of the elements of D&D to see how they might contribute or not to better storytelling. But instead, I would like to present some counterexamples that demonstrate how independent of storytelling D&D can be. Actually, I will make a stronger statement and say that D&D can be played often without never telling a story. Let me give you some examples. With D&D, we could play a gladiator-style combat in which we pit our characters against other characters or even against monsters. We could also play a murder mystery or an escape room. I am fairly new to D&D, but I've heard of an era of D&D in which most of the game consisted of exploration and looting. So most sessions develop with the characters delving deeper into dungeons. Any of these examples could become part of a story, but they can also live standalone as simply fun games without any story at all. If you were to walk to any table where some of these scenarios were being played, you will immediately identify those games as D&D due to some characteristic mechanics like rolling 20-sided dice, making ability checks, etc., even if no story is being told at all. I believe it is clear that the rules and mechanics of D&D live independently of storytelling. Or to express it a bit differently, the rules of D&D do not compel us to tell stories. If D&D was a game of storytelling, I believe that exercising the rules themselves will create a story. That is not the case here. At this point, some of you might be thinking, but D&D is not just a set of rules for role-playing. It is a created universe that has produced books, TV shows, movies, and much more. All of this media has been created to inspire role players and storytellers to play the game in the way that it has been intended to be played, as a group of adventurers adventuring in a world of fantasy. The creators of the game do not support the kind of storyless gameplay that I gave examples for. This is made very clear by the fact that the starter kit not only comes with the rulebook, a set of dice, and some character sheets, but it also comes with a pre-written adventure. These adventure books created by Wizard of the Coast and other independent creators are playable stories. But I would like to remind us here that my contention is not whether stories can be told with D&D, but whether D&D is about storytelling, which tells me that if it is, some good stories must be coming out of some of these games that are being played. So how good are those stories in those pre-written adventures? Well, I'm sure like with many other pieces of media, the quality will vary, and I'm sure that some of those pre-written adventures are actually very good, but I don't believe that the quality of the adventures is relevant here. As we explore what a story is, we found that the quality of a story is highly correlated with events driving a character's arc. One thing that, as far as I know, is universally understood is that these pre-written adventures cannot drive character arcs. We create unique characters every time we sit at a table to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons. So how can these written adventures account for the variety of characters that we can create and connect them to the story in a significant way. They cannot. That is why that responsibility, if it was to happen, will fall 100% on the dungeon master and the players. At this point, it's starting to sound like I'm getting a little personal. Am I saying that all of the streams that I have watched have not captured my attention because the dungeon master and the players were not good storytellers? I do not believe that these dungeon masters and players are bad. Actually, with what I now know about the game, I believe that they are exceptional. I say this because I do believe that the conditions under which we play Dungeons and Dragons makes it very difficult for us to tell good stories. In many good movies, television programs, and books, the authors are often only developing character arcs for one or two main characters. Even with an ensemble cast of 4 or 5 main characters, like in a sitcom, the producers of those shows manage to make that work by utilizing the episodic nature of those shows, and also by moving the spotlight from one main character to the other at different times. In D&D, our tables can range from 3 to 8 players easily. So telling a good story with D&D necessitates that the story arcs for all of these different players is being developed every game, at all times, all of the time. And that really sounds like an impossible task. This task is so difficult that even some of the best games out there, like Critical Role, break this rule by sometimes putting the focus on some of the players while ignoring others. This is done to develop those character arcs successfully because they understand that they're not just a game of D&D, but they're also a show. But this kind of behavior will not work on our game tables. What is our conclusion then? If we care about storytelling, do we just need to abandon D&D and find a different game that is better to support our storytelling ambitions? That would be a very odd conclusion for the first video in a channel that is meant to be about telling stories with D&D. So I propose that instead, let's shift the perspective from which we're looking at the game. So far we have been focusing on the output, the stories that can be created with D&D. But what about the process? Even if our games never become scripts that could be turned into Oscar-winning movies, did we enjoy the process of creating those stories? Our perspective as a dungeon master or as a player will always come from the inside, from the eyes of our characters. The real conclusion here is that I might never find a D&D stream that tells a story that I might enjoy, but that says absolutely nothing about D&D and how enjoyable it is as a game. Because what's really interesting about D&D is that collaborative story construction, which does not compare at all with the kind of passive experience that we have when we're consuming something like a game of D&D in a stream. So maybe the creators of the game did overplay their hand by claiming that D&D is about storytelling. But given that the majority of the enjoyment is not necessarily on that part of the game, maybe we can forgive them. The question now is, can you forgive me? It seems like I took you down this rabbit hole about D&D and storytelling to simply conclude that none of this matters. So as we wrap this video, let me leave you with a couple of things that I found enlightening as I was exploring the topic of this video. The first thing that I found useful is that having a foundational understanding of how good or not good D&D is at storytelling can help us gauge our expectations when consuming D&D media. It can also help us constrain our expectations when we're playing the game. And on top of that, it also helps us develop some empathy for how hard a job it is to be a dungeon master and a player in a game. This understanding has personally made me less passive as a player in my games. Now when I see opportunities for character development for my character or other characters at the table, I might leave some hints for the DM or might actively pursue some of those opportunities to open that character development. The second useful thing that I found while exploring this topic is that I still believe that D&D it's a good platform for telling good stories. And because I believe that, it was important for me to get a good sense for what D&D is good and not good at. So when we're coming up with new ideas on how to improve the game for it to be better at storytelling, we can focus our game creative musings in the right areas. So where do we go from here? I guess as story lovers and as lovers of D&D, we really don't have many other options. Our only option is to explore ways to make the game better at storytelling. That is literally the whole purpose of this channel, and I would love to explore that with all of you. So if you want to be part of this conversation, please subscribe to the channel so that we won't miss each other in the convoluted interwebs. Thank you for sticking around this far, and I hope that seeing the game a little bit different will increase the enjoyment of the game. And with that, I guess we will see you on the next video. Thank you again, and goodbye.